Here's a look at New York City's Times Square. Preparations there underway for tomorrow's New Year's Eve party. It's estimated around 1 million people are expected to attend, so of course security is a major concern. Up to 7,000 police officers will be on patrol throughout the city this weekend. There aren't any specific threats against New York, but authorities aren't taking any chances. Recent terror attacks in Berlin and Nice have forced officers to beef up security this year. Anna Werner is following the latest for us here in New York City. Anna, tell us more about how security will be different there in Times Square and all of New York City this year compared to others.
Well, what has really changed in the security matrix this year, Errol, is authorities have been looking at those incidents that happened in Nice, France, and also in Berlin, where people drove trucks into crowds to injure and kill. And so they have been adjusting their plans around those very specific threats, for one thing. So you may not realize it, but there are some, when they get this all, ready for the weekend, there are some 11 exits to Times Square. It's sort of hard to imagine, there seem like there are streets everywhere around Times Square, but essentially they will have 11 exits. And so what they're doing is they're taking those sanitation trucks. One of them, when fully loaded, weighs 40 tons. And they're creating that kind of obstacle for anybody who wants to try to drive a truck into Times Square to hurt people. They're also keeping in mind the other threats that have been happening around the world. One of the things they mentioned in terms of putting those trucks around is that in order to ram something, unfortunately, if you want to do that, if you have that aim, you have to get up some speed. And, one of the sort of humorous points yesterday at the news conference was somebody mentioned how hard it is to actually get up any sort of speed in Midtown. For our viewers who are not in New York, Midtown Manhattan is sort of like gridlocked most times of the day anyway. So getting up any kind of speed, especially when they have a lot of the traffic closed off on New Year's Eve, is going to be darn near impossible. But Putting those roadblocks into effect using those trucks helps to cut down on the ability of people to sort of come in here and do their worst.
And those French and German attacks that you mentioned really underscore that point, that it's hard to prevent lone wolf attacks. So some of these measures are aimed to at least limit that, but they also, I understand, will have anti-terrorism officers among the crowd, snipers as well. What are some of the other security elements they're putting in place?
So they have made it perfectly plain as of yesterday the obstacles that any would-be attacker or terrorist would face here. Not just trucks. You talk about officers with long guns. There are counterterrorism officers, crisis response officers, some 500 of them who will be very visible with long guns, those, that major heavy equipment. Anybody coming here gets screened not once, but twice, a second time when they're going into the pen. That screening includes radiological screening, explosives screening, the dogs that they use to screen that'll be walking up and down near the crowd on New Year's Eve, they say can smell a small bit of explosives in a group of 200 some people. So they have exquisitely sensitive noses that humans don't have. And then there are going to be civilian officers who are going to be out here and also in the viewing pens watching for anybody who might be doing anything remotely suspicious. So, and don't forget the helicopters in the sky and the boats and other protection around other areas of the 5 boroughs of New York City. So they seem pretty confident. The one thing they do worry about, however, is the one person who flies under the radar, who avoids any surveillance and shows up and decides that New Year's Eve is going to be his night, as the chief put it, to go from zero to hero.
The hope, though, is that none of this happens and people there can just flood the streets and enjoy themselves. Many people are telling me, Anna, here in New York, that they don't actually go to Times Square because there are so many people that flood those streets. You're usually somewhere international for a New Year's celebration. Would you consider being there in Times Square this year?
I will be in New York City this year, but I will not be here in Times Square. I suspect I'll be out enjoying dinner someplace or going to another location. And by the way, New Yorkers, if you're trying to get crosstown, this is kind of a local thing, but the whole city basically is going to be blocked off from down anywhere. If you want to get across, you got to go below 34th or all the way up to 80th, which is a huge chunk of space for those who don't know New York. So watch out for traffic, use public transportation, and don't bring any backpacks, packages, umbrellas. If you're coming here, the cops will not let you in.
All right, some very good advice. Anna Werner, thanks very much.